climbed onto the back of Banara's motorcycle as we rode around Monado's lower palm-lined streets, crawled up its hills and coasted down them to his home on the other side of town. Banara's house was in a valley, down a steep hill. It was unfinished, and something I now realise to be as much a tradition as a necessity to people from central and neighbouring parts of East Java. We drank coffee and ate snacks prepared by his wife and smoked kretek. It was then that Banara began to explain how fond the Monadoese were of black magic. Now, I had some inclination of their pre-Christian beliefs from my friend Dr. Winslow, who had explained that these were not religion, but ran parallel to it. After I recounted the story of Branwell, my son's mystical conception, but Banara's assertions were complete news to me. Banara insisted that the neighbours were using black magic against him because he was from Jogja and unwelcome in Manado. Of course, Banara had made himself a caricature of matronisation, something despised by the inhabitants of the Nusantara outside of Java, as its cultural hegemony all too often resulted in political and economic dominance. He had taken the precaution of marketing his property with salt, pointing out its glistening boundaries to me. Rather like Maddie's insistence on not staying at Hotel Egret Slippy. While I thought this peculiar, I didn't give it much more thought. Indonesia is a strange country that most Westerners never fully come to terms with. Banara was from Java, a place I knew had some traditions which might be described as black magic, so there was little point in dwelling on what he had said. One day, Bude arrived at our house from hers to say that her home was haunted, and could she spend a night in ours. Despite getting unwell with our neighbour Omuni, who always carried a broad smile and seemed very hospitable, Made never really trusted him. Maybe it was because Mina had always been in some kind of dispute with him, but Made instinctively knew that he used black magic. Omuni was from Solo and earned a living buying pearls from far-flung parts of the Nusantara and polishing them at night. Despite coming from a somewhat noble family, he had previously earned a living in Solo as a parking attendant. He now regularly shows his work at exhibitions around Jakarta and appears to be doing very well indeed, almost too well for an artisan jewellery maker. Immediately, Omuni was in the frame to explain these strange events, despite everyone feeling most of the symptoms down their left-hand side, and he lived to our right. Omuni built a lovely home next to ours, and inevitably there had been a minor dispute about land. I found a very Western solution, which probably resulted in him losing face in front of our other neighbours, so there was a motive. Or maybe he was simply annoyed that I had seen through his subterfuge, convincing himself that he had every right to cheat me, and that it was I who was in the wrong for declining to comply. I refused to believe a word about ghosts and black magic. Like all bullies, I do not believe in such events, and sought a more science-based explanation. Martin corrected my terminology, saying that I could not believe as it blatantly exists, not a correction I could then completely comprehend. Shortly after this, the postman delivered a parcel to our house with Bude's name on it. Realising the parcel to contain some kind of evil, Bude refused to open it, but Made did. The package contained a strange letter wishing Bude well on a new marriage, purporting to be from Maspradipta's child. It also contained a Makerna, not any Makerna, but the one that Bude had bought to sell in her store in Block M. As it was an import, it was fairly unique. Because these had not sold well, Made had sold much of the stock to the neighbours at knockdown prices, so it could only have been sent by the neighbours or someone connected to Maspradipta. Bude burnt the Makerna in our yard, which of course meant that its ashes remained on our property. Omuni's guilt was becoming more apparent. Bude attempted to have her jins removed by a local Ustad, a teacher of Islam. He massaged Bude's thumb, which he said smoked, and then she could see many jinn coming from it. But as I have indicated, this didn't last. Maddie explained to me that something had attacked her while wandering around Pacific Place. She was feeling heavy and could hardly walk. I later realised that this was a perfect description for the arthritis-like symptoms one can get with flu, when it feels like the whole body aches. Maddie was obviously very frightened and asked to be taken to Pa Angabaya. But Maddie would never visit a Dukan. We'd often laughed about Pa Angabaya, saying that we must take Lima, her friend from FTs, who spends at least 10% of her money on Dukans. In the taxi, Maddie became progressively worse, something close to a panic attack. Although we had told Pa Angabaya about Bude's problems, we'd not said a lot, but as soon as we entered his shop, he knew exactly what was wrong. He sat Maddie down in his attached home and gave her a glass of warm, salted water, which immediately relieved her. He also encouraged her to put it on her body to reduce the heat, which she did, and it did. Whilst Maddie was recovering, we could hear Pa Angabaya speaking to someone whom I believed was Sultan Anon, the 12th of Chirban, on his phone about what was happening. It was clearly serious. He sent Maddie away with a miniature Chris that the Sultan had given to him, which he told her to keep with her at all times and to sleep with it under a pillow. Pa Angabaya promised to visit us that evening, but we were to lay salt around the house and keep making warm salted water. The house was already full of salt and garlic that Maddie's brother had suggested we use, but a little more was placed in our bedroom. I mentioned earlier that Maddie's father and many others in the Desa were killed by a neighbour who also enticed her sister down a well. If you hadn't already guessed, this was black magic, not murder as we would understand it in the West, but pesugian, offering others to spirits to secure wealth. Maddie's sister is still troubled, as were all her family at the time, with the exception of Maddie, who escaped the effects. Maybe her sister would benefit from Western mental health care, but leaving her to heal seems equally compassionate. Another form of pesugian is to place the head of a dead baby outside one's home. This is thought to be particularly successful if the baby was born on one of Java's holy days, or a teenage virgin girl, and is responsible for grave robberies and occasional abductions and infanticides in Java. In 2012, 24 children's graves were robbed in Bunasari, a suburb of Surabaya, close to the airport. Maddie visited the treacherous neighbour, who embraced her, as no one else in the Desa had spoken to them in many years. I am not at all sure if the Indonesians have an equivalent of sending somebody to Coventry, but let me get in there first and nominate Tangerang Banten for this tribute. The neighbour and Maddie ate together, and Maddie explained that her life was worthless and that they should take hers, not those of her family. The neighbour understood this to be impossible, as black magic can never triumph over such a good person, which is why our current problems are so ill-conceived. We will win, just as Pa Angabaya tells us. I was tempted to think that the Desa had got everything wrong about the neighbour and victimised this poor family, but Maddie tells me that in their kitchen she felt the power and knew that black magic was indeed being employed. During the Selamatan in Gunung Kidul, Maddie was very ill. This often happened when Maddie visited our mountain home and her sister Bude. Mas Pradipta and Bude had taken up temporary residence in our home to complete the finishing and decoration and lay the garden, both of which he is brilliant at, given his work as a wedding organiser. The spirit would jump immediately from Bude to Made. Later this would happen simply when Made spoke to Bude on the phone. Made spent the entire Salamatan burping. Then, when the ceremony finished, I saw a youth run into our bedroom. He was completely silver, like he'd been covered in tinfoil, the non-shiny side facing outwards. I knew he was simply naughty, not evil, but there was something significant to it. I now believe this was simply a warning to protect ourselves, as I now imagine myself and our homes wrapped in metal cages for protection, and my adversaries wrapped in tinfoil, shiny side inwards, reflecting their misdeeds back to them. Certainly when his ghost is present, others will join, if only to see what is happening. This explains why Pa Angabaya found our home overrun with ghosts, and why I had seen a man in brown at Chez Frank. This also explains why Titi had been targeted outside the Chinese gold exchange. The Chinese owners are using ghosts to protect their gold, but when Maddie walked past them, they became interested, and Titi was the weakest link. Poor Titi. Now that they have found her, it is unsafe to walk past that store again. What happened next was the most shocking. Maddie was speaking to me on the bed, and almost mid-sentence fell asleep and started screaming out from her nightmares. This was to repeat itself many times for around 2 weeks, and then again months later. Her Dukan brother rushed in, muttered some Kajawan prayers, then grabbed Maddie's big toe and thumb and said more prayers, rubbed the thumb, and it was gone, but it returned the next day. Normal black magic spells only last for 40 days. If they've not worked during this time, they will not work at all. Possessions are more persistent and will continue possessing or attempting for 100 days before ending. The 100th day anniversary was coming, and we weren't entirely sure when everything started, but it had to by the time we arrived in Bali just after Christmas, so we knew it must be close. Rather like me being aware of major paranormal activity in our home prior to Pa Angabaya's intervention, I was very aware of an increase in activity. Our home was safe, but things appeared to be coming to a head. With this head, my powers were increasing. Ever since arriving back in Indonesia in October the previous year, I'd had pains in my left shoulder. Of course, an economy flight and a journey lasting over 24 hours could provide a simple explanation, but these had been so persistent. Maybe they're simply an effect of the recurring flu-like symptoms that I have also suffered since returning, which included many sleepless nights, pouring with perspiration. I've taken to using oils in those areas I feel the most pain. I favour Gandapura, Indian wintergreen, but a balsam such as tiger balm would work equally well. The truth is, ghosts don't like heat, despite feeling hot being a sign of possession. So a good way of removing them from an area of your body is to use warming oils or balsams. Traditionally, Kajawan followers use aromatic oils like chendana, known as sandalwood in English, as sweet smells also appear to be effective, possibly by transplanting the malevolent with the benign, but don't use alcohol-based perfume. I've also taken to using an Ibu Pijat, massage lady, called Dukan Pijat in some parts of Indonesia. Being very British, I have never welcomed a stranger poking away at my body, but now I look forward to my regular manipulation. What I was beginning to understand was that my left arm and hand were the centre of my powers and also my possession. Some months previously, Maddie had bought a gas barbecue, and I was delighted as it provided a break from fried food. Indonesians really don't comprehend grilling, but do use barbecues for satay ayam and ikan bakar, grilled chicken and fish. I was preparing kebabs and burgers and cooking them outside. Bude and Maddie were a little frightened of the barbecue with its small gas canister, which has a reputation for causing gas explosions. A Batak friend of mine is a major distributor of these canisters and claims it is always misfitting, not the manufacture, that causes the explosions. So when the barbecue stopped working, Maddie had immediately stored it away in a kitchen cupboard. Using my left hand, I identified this barbecue to be the source of our possessions. Of course, it had been outside, and it would have been simple for Pa Erte to put something inside it. In fact, that was probably what stopped it from working. Our stand-in maid stripped it down and found nothing. But the source could have been something flammable, such as paper, oil, flowers, or more sinisterly, oil from a grave. Well, I guess if you've got this far with listening to me, you at least enjoyed something of what I said. I do hope that you have. And it actually was extracts from 3 books that I've written that you can find on this channel, The Magic of Java. I'd really love you to subscribe and hit the button. And yeah, please listen to all 3 of my books. But above all, thank you for listening to this.